Have you ever done everything right, only to be erased by the people who were supposed to love you most? Have you ever stood at a celebration, holding a tray of appetizers instead of a diploma? The truth is, not all love is unconditional. I didn't lose my college fund. I discovered it was quietly taken by the very parents who said, "You're smart, you'll figure it out." And they were right. I did, not out of spite, but out of survival. I scrubbed campus bathrooms by night and wrote scholarship essays by day. I didn't just make it, I rebuilt from zero. If you've ever felt overlooked or outshined by someone else's spotlight, this story is for you. I'll show you how to turn quiet resilience into power and how to write your own legacy when no one hands you one. Because yes, I was once the invisible sister behind the scenes. Today, I run a national mentorship program, not thanks to luck, but because I chose to begin anyway. And if you've ever been told, you'll be fine, watch this video. Because sometimes the strongest journeys start in silence. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I wasn't expecting a miracle, just a confirmation. The tuition portal for UW-Madison had a habit of being slow this time of year, but I'd checked it anyway. Habit. Like brushing my teeth or flipping my pillow to the cool side. But that morning, as the backyard buzzed with the sound of grill smoke and Bethany's voice pitching higher than the fireworks that would come later, I stared at the screen. Balance. $24,322.64 due. Payment. Pending. Not received. I blinked. Then I blinked again. My thumb hovered over the refresh button. I tapped it. I closed the app. I opened it again. Still pending. The savings account. I hadn't touched it since I was 16. It was joint with Mom and Dad, mostly because that's how we opened it back when I first started saving from babysitting gigs and after-school jobs. It was supposed to be untouched, sacred even. We all knew what it was for. I logged in. Balance 0.00. A breeze caught the scent of barbecue ribs and someone's cheap body spray. Bethany laughed behind me, sharp and rising, and I swear it made my screen shake. I found Mom in the kitchen, fussing over a bowl of corn salad. Her smile faltered for a split second when I said, "The tuition payment didn't go through." She didn't look up, just stirred the salad a little faster. I waited. Finally, she exhaled. "It's complicated, Ava." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just those 3 words, as if the truth could be filed under miscellaneous. "I need it to not be complicated," I said quietly. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, like she'd been living 2 lives, and I wasn't part of the one she liked better. "There are things you don't understand right now," she said, brushing past me to grab paper plates. I stood there, hands clenched around my phone, until I heard her through the screen door talking to someone on the porch. "She's smart," Mom said. "She'll bounce back. But the graduation? This is the only chance Bethany has to shine." I didn't move. Not even when the fridge door creaked open and Dad slid in a giant framed photo of Bethany in her cap and gown, right over the summer babysitting schedule I'd color-coded and posted 2 weeks ago. The print had Bethany's name in gold lettering across the bottom. Class of 2018, it said. I guess I didn't make the cut. Later, I stood by the lemonade cooler next to Uncle Steve. He didn't know what had happened. He just kept talking about how proud everyone must be of the girls and how lucky our parents were to have 2 such bright daughters. I smiled politely. I didn't correct him. Because what do you say when the people who raised you quietly erase you from the picture? By sunset, Dad was back in his lawn chair, sipping a soda and tossing a tennis ball to the dog. I crouched next to him. "Dad," I said low, "why's the account empty?" He shrugged like I'd asked him about the weather. "You're smart, Ava," he said. "You'll figure something out." He smiled like it was a compliment. That night, I didn't stay for the fireworks. Instead, I curled up in bed with my laptop and opened the same acceptance letter I'd read a dozen times since April. "Dear Ava Lewis," it began, "we are pleased to inform you." I read it again, line by line, as if it could undo the quiet theft of something I'd built for years. Then I whispered, "I got in. I did everything right." The next morning, I poured cereal into a chipped bowl and stared at the milk swirling in slow circles. Bethany waltzed in wearing one of my blouses, white with blue cuffs, and didn't notice me. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. "Can't believe Mom let me borrow this," she said, twirling once in front of the window. "It's kinda retro chic, don't you think?" I wanted to ask her if she knew, if she'd heard what Mom said, if she'd seen me standing there on the other side of the screen door, the one they always assumed I'd close quietly and never question. But the words stayed in my throat like a stone. She grabbed a granola bar and left, her perfume trailing behind like a question I didn't get to ask. Dad walked by a few minutes later, coffee in hand, phone already to his ear. "Yeah, I'll swing by after Ava's orientation," he said to someone on the line. Then he paused and looked at me. Or, "Whenever it is, she figures things out." He didn't mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. It wasn't malicious, it was casual, as if my ability to adapt made me fair game for sacrifice. Sometimes the deepest cuts aren't the sharpest. They're the ones made by people who love you with conditions. I went to the garage that afternoon and pulled out the old file box I kept under my bed in high school. W-2s from babysitting gigs, letters of recommendation, even my 8th grade science fair ribbon that Dad had once taped to the fridge with pride. The ribbon was still there, bent at the corner. I slid it into the trash. Then I printed a copy of my acceptance letter, just one, and folded it into my wallet. Not for nostalgia, for proof. Because one day, when they ask how I did it, I want to remember the night I applied to a gas station in silence, with fireworks exploding outside my window, and chose not to cry. I want to remember I got in. I want to remember I started anyway. The guests cheered the second Bethany walked into the ballroom, her white dress catching the light like she planned it. I stood near the back, gripping a tray of crab cakes that were too hot to balance and too delicate to drop. My palms were sweating, not from the heat, from the shame. I wasn't on the guest list. I was staff. When I'd signed up with the temp catering agency, I hadn't known what job I'd be assigned to. I just needed money, gas money, tuition appeal printing fees, something to get me out of the hollow silence at home. They called me the night before and asked if I was free for a high-end graduation party at a private country club just outside Madison. I said yes without asking the name on the contract. Turns out the name was Bethany Lynn. She was everywhere. Her initials embossed on champagne flutes, a 12-foot photo backdrop with her smiling next to the university seal. Even the violinist was playing her favorite Coldplay cover. I kept my head down and my hair tucked behind my ears. The catering jacket was a little loose, but it did its job hiding me, until Aunt Linda saw me. "Ava?" She squinted, mid-bite of a bacon-wrapped scallop. "Is that you?" I nodded, trying to smile. Trying. "Hey, Aunt Linda. I thought you were going to college, too. Weren't you accepted to UW-Madison?" I shifted the tray to my other hand, still figuring it out. She opened her mouth to say more, but the party planner waved me toward the dessert table. I moved quickly, like a servant dodging pity. Bethany's voice rang out from the stage moments later. She looked radiant, if over-rehearsed, thanking Mom and Dad for the unwavering support that made all this possible. The guests applauded. I didn't clap. My fingers were sticky from frosting. I slipped outside after the toast and found a bench behind the catering van. I wasn't alone. "You okay?" a guy asked, already halfway through a cupcake. He wore the same catering uniform, sleeves rolled up, collar untucked like he didn't care much about dress codes. "I'm not crying, if that's what you're asking," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say you were." "I'm just tired." "You and me both." He handed me a cupcake. Leftover. They were going to toss them. I hesitated, then took it. Vanilla with raspberry filling. Bethany's favorite. Of course. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Ava." He nodded toward the ballroom. "That your sister?" I didn't answer right away. Then, yeah. She seemed, well, celebrated. That's one way to put it. The cupcake was too sweet, but I finished it. We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for small talk. "You ever want to get out of here?" Caleb said. "I'm part of the university's writing center. We help people, especially students, figure things out. College plans, essays, whatever." He handed me a business card. Could come in handy. I took it and stared at the embossed letters. Caleb Hartman, writing tutor. The party roared back inside. Someone cranked up the music. Young Blood by 5 Seconds of Summer. Bethany loved that song. She once said it made her feel untouchable. I wondered if she still felt that way. Bethany's party had layers. There were floating candles in glass bowls shaped like lotus flowers, a guest book made of Polaroid selfies, and gift bags with rose gold initials tied to the handles. Every detail screamed curated, expensive, effortless. The kind of celebration you see on Instagram and think, her parents must really love her. In the hallway leading to the restrooms, I passed a framed collage of Bethany's childhood photos. Her first ballet recital, her prom dress, her acceptance letter. There wasn't a single photo of me, not even one of the two of us together. I lingered for a second too long. A girl with sparkly heels and a plastic flute of Prosecco walked by and squinted. "Wait, weren't you in drama club with Bethany?" I shook my head. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." But she wasn't. She just didn't remember that I'd been stage crew, behind the curtain, fixing wires, arranging props. Later that night, as I stood outside with Caleb, I said, "I didn't even get an invitation." He looked at me, surprised. "To your sister's party?" I nodded. "It's fine. I guess they thought I'd be too busy. Or maybe they just assumed I'd be working anyway." He leaned back against the car seat. "That's rough. It's just normal." For a while, we listened to the faint strains of a jazz quartet wrapping up their final set. I thought of all the things I could have said to Bethany, how I could have asked her outright if she knew about the tuition money. But I didn't, because deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted her answer. No one noticed when I moved out. There was no argument, no slam door, no suitcase packed in a fit of rage, just silence. The kind that seeps in when you're used to not being asked where you're going and you've stopped offering an answer. I dragged 2 duffel bags and a backpack into a shared apartment near the UW-Madison campus. The building creaked. The walls were a shade of beige that could only be described as tired. But the rent was split 3 ways, and the futon someone left behind only sagged a little. Jess and Tanika, my roommates, didn't ask too many questions. Just nodded and pointed to the shelf in the fridge with my initials written in fading marker. Emergency financial aid came through in September. A short email. A number that didn't solve everything but bought me breathing room. I'd written my appeal letter like a confession. Every sentence tight, careful, honest. It felt like admitting failure and hope in the same breath. To stay afloat, I picked up 2 jobs. Weekdays, I shelved returns at a local bookstore on Monroe Street. Weekends, I cleaned the psych building's offices after hours. The work wasn't hard, but it was constant. My hands smelled like lemon disinfectant and cheap paperbacks. One Friday, I came home after a double shift to find a message in the family group chat. A selfie of Bethany in her new internship blazer standing in front of a marble column. The caption read, "She's doing great." No mention of me. I didn't respond. No one noticed. Sometimes disowning someone isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing silence. Caleb started meeting me twice a week at the writing center. We worked through drafts of scholarship essays, and he showed me tricks I'd never learned in school. How to make a paragraph sing without over-explaining. He was patient, kind. He also brought good snacks, which didn't hurt. One afternoon, as I was packing up, Caleb gestured toward an office at the back. "You should meet Professor Lynn," he said. "She runs the Advanced Writing Fellowship. Think you'd be a good fit." Professor Lynn didn't look up right away when we walked in. She was typing furiously, glasses low on her nose, tea mug balanced on a stack of marked-up essays. When she did look up, she studied me like I was a paragraph she wasn't sure about yet. "You're Ava?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You write with a tight kind of courage," she said. "We need more of that around here." She didn't smile, but she handed me a folder anyway. Deadlines in 4 weeks. That night, I ate cold spaghetti out of a mug and hung my first lease on the wall with blue painter's tape. My name, my space. I was building something, even if it was made from leftovers and pushpins. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a new message, another update from Gail, a photo of Bethany holding a bouquet, beaming on some rented rooftop. Caption, "Our girl." I stared at the screen until the brightness blurred my eyes. Then I opened the group chat, scrolled to the top, and hit delete. I blocked both numbers, not out of spite, but to make space. "You chose your legacy," I whispered. "I'm building mine." Professor Lynn's folder sat on my desk, still unopened. I hadn't touched it since she handed it to me. That night, I flipped it open and spread the pages across my bed. Application forms, sample prompts, deadlines. I pinned the deadline to the corkboard above my bed using a single pink pushpin. Right next to a photo of Bethany and me from 3 summers ago, flipped face down. Let them call it distance. I called it clarity. The apartment wasn't much, but it taught me how to be alone without being lonely. Jess was a pre-med student who rarely slept and labeled her leftovers with expiration dates and passive-aggressive smiley faces. Tanika, who studied dance, played music that vibrated the floors every Sunday morning while stretching in the hallway. They didn't ask me about my family. I think they sensed there were questions better left unopened. Sometimes I'd come home late, too exhausted to even microwave leftovers, and find a sticky note from Jess. "Saved you the last dumpling." Or Tanika would toss me a bag of trail mix before heading to rehearsal with a simple, "You look like you need this." They weren't trying to rescue me. They just noticed. And after years of being invisible in my own house, that mattered more than I could say. On Saturdays, I stocked shelves at the bookstore while the owner, a wiry woman named Claire with a soft voice and tough love, taught me how to make pour-over coffee and organize author signings. She never asked if I was okay, just handed me new books and told me which ones were worth reading. "Stories," she once said, "are how we remember we're still here." At night, I studied under the harsh light of the kitchen island, scholarship forms spread across the laminate surface. Caleb sent edits via email, his comments warm and direct. "You have a voice," he once typed. "Now trust it." I read that line 5 times before closing my laptop. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows, I imagined what it might feel like if Mom or Dad reached out, not to defend themselves, not to explain, but just to ask if I was okay. They never did. Eventually, I stopped waiting for that message. What replaced the ache wasn't anger. It was quiet, and a kind of forward motion that didn't need applause. It rained the morning I mailed my fellowship application, the kind of rain that soaked through your shoes and made paper feel heavier in your bag. But I didn't mind. The weather couldn't touch the weight I'd already learned to carry. Tanika offered me her umbrella, but I shook my head. "Let it hit me," I said, smiling. "I've survived worse." By the time I reached the red brick drop box at the campus post office, my jeans were plastered to my legs and my fingertips were wrinkled. Still, I slid the packet in without flinching. That envelope held more than just paperwork. It held my fight. Back at the apartment, I changed into dry sweats and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt determination. Above my bed, the fellowship deadline was circled 3 times in pink highlighter. Next to it, a flipped-over photo of Bethany remained pinned like a ghost I hadn't decided to let go of. Professor Lynn had written the recommendation herself. I hadn't even asked. She'd simply handed me the sealed letter one afternoon after class and said, "For when you're ready to go further than they imagined." She never mentioned my parents, never asked about them either. It was a quiet kind of respect I didn't know I needed, but not everyone stayed quiet. That Friday, I got a voicemail from my mother. "Hey, Ava, I heard from Aunt Lorna that you're applying for some award. Hope you remember who helped you get there. That was it. No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just a subtle reminder that even my victories, in her eyes, were still connected to their sacrifices, as if my debt to them was emotional fine print I hadn't read closely enough. I didn't call back. Instead, I transcribed the voicemail onto a note card and mailed it to myself, with a handwritten note beneath, motivation, not memory. It joined the others in a manila folder I labeled proof, not of who they were, but of who I'd become despite it. Work hours crept up again. I took on more shifts at the bookstore and added late-night cleaning duties at the writing center, just in case I was selected and had to travel for interviews. Every dollar counted. Every hour stacked like bricks under a foundation I was building alone. Caleb noticed the bags under my eyes one afternoon as I scrubbed coffee stains off a library table. "You're allowed to rest, you know," he said gently. I shrugged. "I'll rest after I open the envelope." He didn't press. When the interview email arrived, subject line, "Avery Rose Fellowship, congratulations, you've been shortlisted." I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. I just sat there blinking at the screen, thinking of how Bethany had cried over the wrong color tassel for her cap while I used duct tape to patch my backpack. The interview panel was held in the Humanities Building, room 317. I wore a blouse from the Goodwill clearance rack and ironed it with a borrowed steamer. Before walking in, I checked my reflection in a vending machine's chrome panel and whispered, "Don't just tell them what you survived. Show them what you built." During the interview, they asked why I applied. I said, "I wasn't funded by legacy, I was forged by lack. I didn't grow up with doors open for me. I built my own and learned to walk through quietly." When I left, Professor Lin was waiting outside the building steps with a coffee. "You didn't just answer questions," she said. "You told a story." I wanted to believe that mattered. That evening, I checked the mail and found a thick envelope bearing the UW-Madison seal. My name was typed in bold across the front. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the futon, envelope in hand, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this point. The soaked shoes, the silences, the night shifts, and the voicemail that tried to rewrite the story I was finally reclaiming. Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote one line. What they took paid for her celebration. What I built might fund my life. And then I placed the envelope on the shelf beside it. Unopened, but not unseen. I never planned to speak publicly, but when the dean handed me the mic, I didn't hand it back. The room was warmer than I expected. Rows of polished tables, the soft clink of cutlery against porcelain, and flickers of candlelight bouncing off crystal glasses. UW-Madison's alumni hall had never looked so formal. I'd picked my outfit carefully. Navy blue dress, small earrings, a simple braid, not flashy, not invisible, just enough. They called my name right after dinner. I stood, smoothed the front of my skirt, and took the long walk to the podium, hands only slightly trembling. In my pocket was the speech I'd practiced for weeks, a safe, gracious thank you. Nothing personal, nothing sharp. The dean smiled and offered the microphone with a nod. The lights above the podium warmed my face. I unfolded the paper and looked down. And then I crumpled it, not for drama, just because it didn't feel like mine anymore. I looked out over the crowd, professors, students, donors, alumni, and somewhere in the third row near the back, two faces froze me mid-breath. My parents? Gail and Richard Lewis seated beside a couple in matching school colors, pretending they hadn't noticed me, or maybe hoping I hadn't noticed them. I took a breath, then another. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. And I began. I wasn't born into struggle, not in the way people usually mean. I had clean sheets, warm meals, parents who paid for ballet lessons and orthodontics. But when it came time to go to college, something shifted. I paused. You could hear the air move. My tuition savings, money I believed had been protected, was gone. Quietly, without warning, without apology. When I asked why, the answers twisted into guilt, into silence, into praise disguised as dismissal. Somewhere near the edge of the room, a glass clinked hard against a plate. I was told I'd figure it out, that I was strong, that someone else deserved the celebration more. So I worked 2 jobs, slept 3 hours a night, wrote scholarship essays in library corners, and wiped down bathroom sinks before exams. And when I stood in front of rejection letters, I told myself, "You're not invisible, just unseen." The silence wasn't cold, it was electric. I don't share this for pity. I share it because sometimes the people who raise you aren't the ones who lift you. And sometimes the legacy you build begins in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. My eyes never left the microphone, but I could feel it, the tightening in the room, the shift from polite applause to something quieter, listening. I'm standing here today because of public libraries, because of night shifts, because of professors who saw value in me when others stopped looking. I'm here because when everything else was taken, I still had the ability to try. A pause, then a small intentional nod to Professor Lin in the front row. Her expression didn't change, but she lifted her chin slightly as if confirming, yes, this was the right choice. I wrapped up quietly. Thank you for recognizing not just achievement, but endurance, and for proving that forged paths are sometimes stronger than inherited ones. When I stepped away from the mic, the applause was slow to build, but when it came, it was steady. Not thunderous, but real. Back at my table, Caleb leaned in. "You didn't just speak," he said. "You carved space." I sipped my water and tried not to look toward the door, where my parents had slipped out during dessert. Later that evening, a woman approached me with a press badge clipped to her jacket. "I'm with Madison Weekly," she said, handing me a card. "Would you be open to an interview?" That speech? We don't hear stories like that often, especially not in rooms like this. I hesitated, then took the card. I'll think about it. I didn't sleep much that night. The article went live 3 weeks later. Forged by lack, how Ava Lewis funded her own future. The headline was bold, the photo grainy, taken mid-speech with my hands slightly raised like I just let go of something heavy. The story spread quickly, shared on local networks, university pages, and eventually national education forums. My inbox filled with messages, some from strangers thanking me, others from old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years, even one from a counselor at East High who said they'd printed my article for their office bulletin board. I didn't hear from my parents, but I did get a text from Bethany. "Nice speech. You could have just told the truth to us." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "I did. You just weren't listening." I didn't wait for a reply. Later that night, I went for a walk. The campus was quieter now, classes thinning, leaves starting to turn. I passed by the old humanities building where I'd once cried in a janitor's closet between shifts. Walked past the coffee shop where Caleb first scribbled essay notes on a napkin for me. Past the tree outside the library where I'd called the emergency aid office shaking, not from cold, but from need. I stopped near the lake. The water barely moved, the moon just beginning to rise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Not because they forgave me, not because they changed, but because I no longer needed them to. I turned back toward home, the path ahead lit by scattered lampposts and quiet resolve. Some stories begin with applause. Mine began with silence, and the choice to speak anyway. I met them at a cafe with big windows and even bigger expectations, but I didn't come with forgiveness. It was mid-January, the kind of cold that made door hinges creak and breath visible. I chose a table near the back, close enough to the radiator, but still in full view of the Capitol dome, peeking through the frosted glass. I arrived 10 minutes early, latte in hand, scarf still wrapped around my neck. They arrived 5 minutes late. My father's gait was slower, shoulders hunched. Gail's coat looked too thin for the weather, or maybe time had simply worn her down in places no fabric could cover. They didn't hug me. I didn't offer. We sat. The waitress came, smiling too warmly for the tension at our table. Can I get you started with anything?" "Just coffee," Richard mumbled. "Two," Gail added. "Please." Once she left, the silence thickened. They didn't comment on the weather or the Capitol view or how long it had been. Instead, Richard spoke first. "We lost the house." Gail sighed, eyes not meeting mine. "The HOA fees, the taxes, it added up faster than we thought." I nodded once, no reaction. "We thought maybe—" Richard cleared his throat. "Maybe you'd consider helping out a little, just until things stabilize. You're doing well, and family looks out for each other." Family. That word again, like a coat they were suddenly trying to wear again. I took a sip of my latte, watching the snow drift outside. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I laid it gently on the table. "For your coffee," I said. "That's all I owe you." Gail's face twisted, half hurt, half disbelief. "We raised you." I didn't flinch. "And I survived it." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "We did what we had to do for the family." "So did I said quietly. Gail opened her mouth again, but I didn't stay for the next excuse. I stood, adjusted my scarf, and stepped away from the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't wait for their faces to crumble or for a grand apology that would never come. Outside, the snow had started falling heavier, soft and silent. Caleb was leaning against his car across the street, hands tucked in his coat pockets. He looked up as I approached and opened the passenger door without a word. I slid in. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. We drove in quiet, radio low, tires crunching the slush beneath. At a red light, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the Avery Rose Foundation. Subject line, "Formal offer, mentorship program director." My breath caught. I didn't open it yet. I didn't have to. Some things you can feel before they unfold. Back in my apartment that night, I pulled out the journal I'd kept since freshman year, the one with receipts tucked in the back and deadlines circled in red and quotes from Professor Lynn scrawled in margins. I turned to the last page and wrote, "They built a party. I built a life." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of my apartment, landing on the envelope I'd pinned above my desk months ago, the one from my first scholarship offer. Next to it, the letter from the writing center, still smudged with Caleb's coffee stain. I moved around the kitchen slowly, making oatmeal on the stove instead of in the microwave. I was no longer rushing, no longer proving, just existing. When I finally opened the formal offer, I read every word. A full-time role, benefits, a relocation stipend if needed, a budget to run programming for high school girls with complicated families and brilliant minds. At the bottom, a note from the director, "Your story moved us. We think it will move others too." I closed my laptop and let the quiet settle in. This wasn't just about rejection anymore. It was about release. The house they lost was never mine. The love they offered came with terms I no longer accepted. And what I had now, work that mattered, people who saw me and a voice I wasn't afraid to use, was more than I'd ever been promised. I smiled just a little, then reached for my scarf. There was snow to walk through and a life still waiting. I didn't open the envelope because I needed a win. I opened it because I finally knew it wouldn't define me. What I built in silence was never meant to make noise. It was meant to last. Sometimes the people closest to us confuse love with control. But love, real love, doesn't keep score or take credit. It lets you grow, even if that means letting go. And when your roots are strong enough, even a storm feels like a passing cloud. If this story reminded you of someone you've had to grow apart from, or someone who helped you through the quiet parts, feel free to share your thoughts. I'd be honored to hear how you found your strength too, and if you believe in quiet strength, in stories that grow slowly but strike deep. Subscribe to the channel because sometimes the most powerful journeys are the ones no one saw coming.